When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease God YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be continuing on our Game of Thrones reread. And yeah, so let's get into it. We're going to be doing Ned 11. We're getting into the end game here with Ned. He's only got a couple chapters left after this. And yeah, I mean, I'm already a chapter ahead when it comes to my notes, and it's really cool. We're almost getting to the Winner You Die chapter with Cersei, which again has a huge influence on this channel, given that it's in the intro basically for every single video. So yeah, getting to some exciting times, starting to wind our way down in this book. We're not, there yet, but we're getting there. But that'll get us into page 459. We were actually on page 462. I don't know if I skipped changing the pages off of the last chapter, but yeah, so we're on page 462. Again, Ned is on the throne. He's going to be hearing a lot of the grievances. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the building up of the conflict in the Riverlands and kind of how first blood has been drawn. And this is a very important chapter for, again, the propaganda of Westeros, right? You're going to be going on this idea of who is starting this war, who is the villain, and who is the victim. It's something I think is very similar to the way we look at World War I with Germany, right? Germany very much is viewed as the villain because they lost, right? So the way we write history is through the winners. The Germans are obviously going to be the people that are looked at as the villains in World War I. I'm not going to talk about World War II. That's a whole different story. But World War I feels kind of very similar to kind of what's going on here with this grievance. But we come in on the scene of Ned on the throne, taking in the windows in the throne room. He remembers the Targaryen banners when he had been here before, again during the sack of King's Landing, which are now replaced by hunting tapestries with different colors. But even now, Ned feels like the only color in the room is the color red. Again, just to build up this essence or this feeling of this is still the Targaryen throne room, right? This still, even though the Baratheons have taken over, it doesn't feel like, it feels like a foreign place or a foreign ruling power. And I think that's very apparent when we also look at Dragonstone with Stannis. It doesn't really feel like a home for the Baratheons. It feels very foreign, like they're not welcome. But Ned notes how the chair is high above them all, but the chair is horrible. It has jagged blades made of steel everywhere. His leg was throbbing from his injury, and the seat had grown worse and worse each hour that went by. We really get this feeling that this is not a comfortable life, right? Ruling is something that's not fun. It's not easy. It's very difficult to do. And when you think about this, right, this isn't just, we're going onto the throne for maybe just to hear some 30-minute argument and you make a ruling on it. No, you're sitting on this chair for hours and hours, and because you're hearing all the complaints of the people, right? All of these different grievances, whether it's just some simple dispute about land or a dispute about how you're being paid or something like that, taxes. We get a really good idea of this with Dany in book 5, where she's doing this exact same thing. The only difference is Dany is kind of in a comfortable seat, whereas the Iron Throne is not that, right? The Iron Throne, you have to be wary, right? Because if you make one wrong, little shimmy while you're in the chair, bam, now you're cut, you're bleeding down your side or whatnot. And that's exactly what Ned is kind of noting this chair. And Ned even recounts a nice little tidbit here from Aegon, that he had said the ruler should never sit comfortable, which is such a good line because ruling is difficult. And you can't just be sitting back relaxing like I talked about, right? It's this idea that, again, Aegon wants people to be attentive, to not abuse this power, because being king comes with its benefits. You get everything you wanted. People need to basically follow your rule. But at the same time, it comes with a lot of responsibility and things that someone like Robert is not doing, for instance. And really, it paints the picture again also of why Robert doesn't want to be king. There's not a lot of satisfaction in his daily life when it comes to ruling. Ned damns Aegon's arrogance and Robert and his hunting, which is interesting because what we know of Aegon, it doesn't really seem like he sat the chair that often, right? When you think about it, Aegon's conquest, it was a lot of him being very proactive. And even after, he spent a lot of time trying to invade Dorne, and even when it comes to just simple ruling and constructing things, a lot of that was actually left to Visenya. So I do think it's very interesting that, you know, Aegon really, compared to like the modern king, right? What you're expected from if you're Robert, didn't actually sit this awful throne as much as other people probably did. But that'll get us into page 463. Or moving on, Varys asks that people are quite sure that these are more than just brigands. Ned notes that there are only 3 counselors in attendance: Pycelle, Varys, and Littlefinger, as Robert had taken half the court with him to go on this hunt. And apparently, a white hart had been spotted in the Kingswood. So, for people that may forgot, this is basically the same thing that happens in House of the Dragon, where there's this white hart for Aegon's name day, and so Viserys is trying to hunt it for, you'd presume, Aegon. And this is a very important sign. We know how important the common folk see signs like this. If Robert was to get this white hart, it would bless kind of his reign and the reign of Joffrey. And so that's really important. Now, what's even more important is, we don't know this yet, but it'll happen a little bit later on. This actual white hart is not actually killed by the royal party. It is killed by wolves. It's a kind of, again, building on this conflict that the wolves and the stags will be at odds. Now, we know in reality that Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella, they're not actually stags. They're just full Lannisters. But it's what people believe them to be as stags. And we know that Ned and Joffrey, and even later on Robb, are going to go after the Lannisters. But also something else I noted here, just because they don't get the white hart, it really paints this idea of the illegitimacy of Joffrey, as well as how he's not really fit to rule either. Where again, we see something like in House of the Dragon, where it seems like the white hart shows that Rhaenyra is fit to rule, but someone like maybe Aegon or Viserys is not. Which I did find interesting, because it's kind of based off of Fire and Blood. I mean, I don't know if Rhaenyra was fit to rule either, but you know. Ned at least is happy to know that he gets to sit while all the others must stand. Ned notes all of the people, lords, knights in gold or wool, and such in the throne room. We get this idea that, again, it's fairly populated with people of higher class and nobility. But something that is interesting is that all of these people have to stand for hours and hours and hours. It's a really weird system, right? Because it's almost like this room of no one having any comfortability, because you could make the argument, I would rather stand for 8 hours than sit in this awful chair for 8 hours, right? That's very uncomfortable. So, I don't know, you go back and forth, but either way, this just seems like a really bad system that we got going on here. Like, can we not get some seats in here for people? But I don't know. It is very interesting to me. Raymond Derry then says, "Oh, Lord Varys, they were brigands, Lannister brigands." Ned could feel the unease in the room. Again, this is a very big accusation. Remember, the Lannisters are the royal family right now, with the Baratheons. Accusing them of some crime like this is, one, very bold given the Lannister power, and two, is basically saying the throne itself is causing this war and crime. But Ned was not surprised by this, as the Riverlands and the Lannisters had been massing armies near the Golden Tooth Pass, but it was bound for blood to flow. The only thing Ned had to do was how to staunch the wound. And I think the other point of this, right, is Ned's main goal from this is, one, to make this seem as honorable and just as possible. So not to be going in on the Lannisters out of a sense of vengeance is something that's going to be a big key here. Now, the second part of this is going to be making the Lannisters look like the bad guys. Because remember, right, the Starks / the Tullys are the ones that actually make the first move. Catelyn taking Tyrion prisoner, again, against Tyrion's will, they had no proof to do so, was really the first shot, right? That was the first move. The Lannisters didn't make the first move. The Lannisters are responding to what Catelyn did. So a lot of this is about shifting the blame away from Catelyn and onto the Lannisters. Carl Vance then says that these are the only survivors of a keep, a village, of the Mummers Ford. Ned commanded them all to rise, as Ned did not trust what anyone said while kneeling, which is very wise. Again, think about Balon Greyjoy. One of the things that we talked about in my Greyjoy Rebellion video was, why did Robert not kill Balon, right? Balon is making these promises with basically Robert's Warhammer to his head while he's on his knees. This is something that, again, I think Ned would have thought about, because Balon Greyjoy is not someone trustworthy and is someone that is going to start a rebellion once Ned and Robert are dead. And all of them do end up rising, some needing help, but that gets us into page 464. So moving on, Ned then notes Eris Oakheart, as he is the one guarding Ned, the king's hand, today. Raymond Derry then tells Joss, an older man, to tell Ned what happened. Joss says, "If you please, your grace," to which Ned corrects him, saying that he is the king's hand, he is not the king. But he also wonders how someone only a few days' ride has no idea who the king is, especially given that Ned has Stark attire on. Now, again, I find this really odd, just based upon the fact that, like, a lot of these people are just simple peasants. A lot of these people wouldn't have any reason to really come to the capital, right? They are, having to farm the land or have some other, service or good to survive. A lot of these people do not have the education to understand what sigils are. A lot of these people just don't care. And when you look at the king, right? The king, it doesn't really seem like he comes to the Riverlands or even the surrounding areas that often. So, and you also look at Robert's appearance. Robert looks so much different. Like right now, Ned looks more the role of Robert than Robert does. Robert is a heavy drunk. He is someone that has dark shadows under his eyes. He's overweight. He has an unkept beard. He doesn't really look very kingly. That's something that's constantly said over and over again. Ned looks way more like the king, even with his injured leg. He's much more, fit in his appearance. He is someone that is dressing a bit more, richly than maybe Robert would at this point. So yeah, I think it is interesting that, Ned expects some of these people to know who the king is just based upon their social, station. I find that a little bit of Ned kind of overlooking some of the things that the common people would go through. Another thing I think is even more interesting that I think connects to this really well. Think about it like this. Stannis had once thought that Tywin was the king. Stannis is someone that's well educated. Stannis is someone that, grew up in quite a lot of privilege, and even he didn't know who the king was. So that just kind of, again, shows, kind of an inaccurate statement from Ned. But Joss notes he had an alehouse, and now all of it is gone as they drank it all and burned the roof and house down. Another person pipes up saying their farm was burned down and his cows slaughtered, leaving them for the flies. Again, just a little bit of that foreshadowing for what we're going to see a lot with Arya and Brienne's storyline is the peasant people, the common folk, are the people that are really affected by war, not the Tullys, right? I mean, these people did nothing wrong. They had nothing to do with Catelyn's abducting of Tyrion or anything like that. The aggression that maybe the Lannisters feel that is prompting them to go to war. I just, I think this is something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough when it comes to our own world and war as a whole. Another person sparks up saying they killed their apprentice boy, and they even played games with him. It wasn't something where they simply killed him. They basically made him run, and then they would poke him until the big one, the mountain, rode him down. Very simple, or very similar description to the Hound riding Micah down. The girl that was still on her knees says they killed her mother, but she stops, probably to suggest that they raped her or did something of that nature as she begins to sob. But that gets us into page 465. Moving on, Raymond Derry continues the tale, stating at Wendish, the raiders piled straw against their wood walls and watched them burn alive. Once the defenders opened the gates, they were filled with arrows. Varys notes how dreadful this is and asks how men can be so cruel, which is very ironic coming from him because based upon his plans that he's talked about in this book already, he wants the Dothraki to invade Westeros, which would cause even more of this. Just want to point that out. But the story continues as they went to Sharer's Holdfast, but it was made of stone. Some of the raiders suggested smoking them out, but the big one decided there was riper fruit at the Mummer's Ford. Ned could feel the tension in the room, and in the chair he noticed that the chair had hidden blades that could even kill a man if the stories were true regarding Maegor. Again, we don't know if this is true. There's a lot of rumors surrounding what happened with Maegor. Maybe his wife, brought in some Kingsguard and they killed Maegor, or something could have happened there. Maybe Maegor did just die on the chair. Who knows? We don't really have any confirmation on that. It was said that Aegon had combined 1,000 swords, and Balerion used his breath to bring them together, and that men had hammered on them for 59 days. Kind of an insane way to build a chair, right? And it's almost a power symbol, right? Or not even kind of, it is. You're taking all of these defeated swords that Aegon, did, right? He defeated all of his enemies during the conquest besides Dorne, and he basically shows this as a representation, right? If you come to the Iron Throne, you have to look at this chair and go, okay, if we rebel, this is what's going to happen to us. So it's a little bit of that, but also taking 59 days to hammer it together really shows you how grand of a scale this chair is that we don't really see in the normal Game of Thrones story. It's a little bit like they try to do a little bit more of an accurate representation on House of the Dragon, and still not perfect, but it's a little bit more accurate in that show than it is in Game of Thrones. Ned was still questioning why he was on the seat, but he asks if they have any proof. Did the men wear crimson cloaks or have lion baiters? Now remember, Ned already understands that it's Lannister men that did this, but he can't just outright condemn the Lannisters without any type of proof. He can't. It's all about, again, having some proof to put all of the blame on the Lannisters instead of the Riverlands, because he doesn't want the Tullys to be the aggressors or the villains in this scenario where they're just warmongering. That's the whole point of this. Also, Ned is just a very just man, and he is not going to go off of just his suspicions. Mark Piper snaps that even Lannisters are not so blind as to do so. Again, Mark does not understand the game being played here. Ned needs proof to shift the blame on the Lannisters. This is all about propaganda and making the Lannisters the villain in this conflict. In my notes, again, I reference World War I with Germany. But Ned also notes that Piper is a bit too young and rash for his taste, but is a fast friend of Edmure's. Again, very similar to Edmure himself. Edmure is someone that is not the smartest. He's someone that looks for heroics. He wants glory. Mark Piper is kind of that same vein. Carl Vance then takes a much more measured reply as he states how the men were all clad in mail and good steel, with lances, axes, and swords. And he prompts another of the peasants to speak. Again, when we look at what we just got done with Tyrion, right? The mountain clans don't even have weapons like this. And Tyrion talks about how Lannisters have all this great steel. It's a nice little connection there. It's a way of George, again, connecting the chapters. And it makes you think, like, how would this band of just outlaws or rebels get such good armor? The man states that all of them had war horses. He had worked in the stables and he knew the difference. So again, now we're also being told by another one of the peasants that these people not only had great armor and great weapons, but they also had really good bred horses. All of this is pointing to some rich house or some richer power funding this attack. Littlefinger now at this point notes that they were well armed. Could they have stolen the horses from the last place they had been at? Ned adds how many were in this party. The peasants have varying answers. Again, when you're a peasant and your farm's getting invaded, or this doesn't even matter of, is the whole force at your area, right? At your little wooden keep. And so the answers vary from 50 to hundreds and hundreds. It was an army. And Ned has another measured response, asking if any one of them had an ornament that could be used to identify these people. Joss says no, they were wearing plain armor except the leader, who was a big one. He wore armor bigger than any man, and that they say giants are gone, but this man could be one. Mark Piper gets straight to the point, saying basically, we're not gonna, basically stopping all the speculation, saying it was the mountain, and that this whispers continue. Again, this is now suggesting that a Lannister bannerman did this and led this attack. And again, Ned thinks that if this is true, that would implicate Tywin, as he is a bannerman to him. Really just talking about what I just said, but even Ned comes to that conclusion. But Ned is already knowing that it's the Lannisters. He just needs that proof. And this can really be the thing that leads to that. Ned thinks that it's no wonder the small folk are so frightened. They are being called here to call Tywin a murderer, and he even wonders if they were given a choice, which is a great point by Ned. This is a great observation, something that I didn't remember from my last couple rereads of the book. But think about this, you're a peasant. Not only has your home just been savaged, people you know have been killed, now you're being told to come to King's Landing, this foreign place you've probably never been to come before a king, a lot of noble lords, and now call someone that you know has this reputation of killing people that cross him and calling him a murderer and this awful person. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a great chance that a lot of these people that were forced to come here by people like Mark Piper, like Edmure, and by Carl Vance. Pycelle then pipes up Ever the Lannister supporter and asks how could he know is the mountain? There are many big men. Derry, Piper, and Vance all disagree and say no man, even the Hound, rivals his size, which is true. And again, it's just another nice little nod here that, again, Pycelle is a Lannister crony, and this should be obvious in the way he talks about this in his chapter. Again, Pycelle keeps saying that Gregor has no reason to do this as he has lands as an anointed knight. Again, which I guess is a fair argument just based upon you look at the way that knights are viewed, the importance put on that, and also it's so beneath these lords to do this reckless looting and raiding and all of that. Again, it's Pycelle trying to gain the Lannisters some favor and not put them as the bad guys in the situation. So it's kind of the counterbalance to Ned, except, well, Ned has more power than Pycelle does at this moment. But Piper says that he is a false knight and is Tywin's mad dog. Pycelle, again, instead of going and addressing the people of the court, now turns to Ned. Again, reminding Ned that Tywin is Cersei's father, which is just like, yeah, duh. Like, Pycelle, are you just trying to threaten Ned here? Like, what was the point of saying this? Ned understands what's going on here. But Ned just goes, do you take me for an idiot, basically? But no, he states that he is glad Pycelle said that, or we would have forgotten, of course. But Ned looks into the audience and sees people leaving, obviously to inform Tywin or Cersei of what is happening. And then he also notes that Sansa is in attendance and is kind of mad that Mordain had let her come. But this is kind of odd, given that Sansa always goes to court and always goes to these rulings. Again, it's something that Sansa enjoys to do. So it is kind of weird that Ned is noting this, given that Sansa's been attending a lot of these for weeks now, it would appear. I thought that was kind of a little weird. Also, I don't know why Ned wouldn't want Sansa at these, given that if she is basically going to become queen, it is going to be important to understand how ruling is done and things like that. Even though, you know, women don't have really that role, it's still important, I think, for Sansa to understand these things and be at court and, again, publicly to make appearances for her as well. So again, I think all of this makes sense as Sansa is going to be the future queen. But Ned does note that how was she supposed to know what would happen today, which I guess is also a fair point as well. But Littlefinger then poses a great question. Where were all of these lords when their people were getting slaughtered? And they all say they were protecting the Golden Tooth with their lords and were sent to find any survivors and to take them to the king. Raymond Derry also speaks up, saying that he was across from Riverrun because Edmure had summoned him, but when he got the news and by the time he got there, the Lannister force was already gone. Again, just showing that the Lannisters knew what they were doing, right? This was a calculated assault to draw forces away from the Golden Tooth to weaken Edmure, his force. And again, this is something we also need to note, right? The Lannisters already have a superior force than the Riverlands, right? They're better, well equipped. Again, they're a richer area. Also, there's just more men there. There's more population there. And the Lannisters just have all of the advantages outside of their being the aggressor. They are the ones that are going to be attacking. That is the only advantage that the Riverlands holds as of right now. As well as maybe you would look at the Riverlands having more sympathy and maybe sway with the king than maybe the Lannisters do, or Tywin specifically. Maybe they think that Ned can counterbalance what Cersei has in Robert's Council. But that will get us into page 468. So moving in, Littlefinger asks, what will they do if they come again? And Piper says they will use their blood to water their crops. Sir Carl says Edmure has sent men to every holdfast a day's ride from the border and will bleed them if they come. But that's exactly what Tywin wants to do. Tywin wants to take this force that's inferior to his own and spread them out. So if Tywin does seek to invade the Riverlands, it's going to be so easy. His forces will outnumber the main host of Edmure's easily, and already does. So this is just a perfect move of Tywin planning what's going to happen in the war before the war has even officially started. It's just great military strategy by Tywin. Ned, again, notes this exactly in his head. He wants to spread out Edmure's forces. And again, Edmure falls into this trap if he's too gallant, he's too honorable. And these are all things that are very interesting to understand, because Ned is someone that would not have done this, right? Ned is someone that's very honorable and noble, but he understands the game that's being played here and would not do the same thing that Edmure is doing, which it does show that, again, Ned is someone that tries to follow this honorable code, but at the same time, Ned understands warfare. And that's something I really enjoy, is that when we talk about Ned as a character, I think maybe more casual readers of A Song of Ice and Fire, or people that just do not understand fully Ned's character, is that he just isn't this idiot. He's not this honorable idiot or fool. He understands, again, he understands his strength, which is war. War is a strength of Ned. He went through Robert's Rebellion. He has been brought up and trained on how to command an army, to be a soldier. And so when you look at all the political moves that Ned does and the way he handles King's Landing, it's all about preparing if there's a war, preparing for what he is good at, not this political maneuvering, which he isn't so good at. That's exemplified in the way he handles this chapter, the way he handles his conversation with Catelyn, preparing the North for war. He completely understands all of the pieces on the board when it comes to warfare. Littlefinger says that if their fields and holdfasts are now made safe, what do they seek from the crown? And again, this is something that's very important to understand as well, because if we look at this system where the higher lords need to protect their common folk, that is basically the contract to you serving this lord. Because if this lord can't protect you, then why should you pay taxes to them? Why should you do all these things? Why should you serve them if they're not going to protect you, if they're not going to do the rights of the lord? And the lords in turn then turn to the kings, right? That's why a lot of people bend the knee to Aegon the Conqueror, because he is offering them protection, right? We're going to stop all of this infighting in the kingdoms, and we're going to be one unified Westeros. So that when you have one person break the peace, the king is supposed to step in. And so that's what Edmure and the River Lords are trying to do here, is get the crown to step in to get that backing, to where now you have a counterbalance, where they right now are, again, the losing side against the Lannisters if they are alone. But if they get the crown support, everything changes there. Raymond Derry argues his exact point, saying the Lannisters have broken the king's peace, and asks for justice to be done, as Mark Piper adds on that Edmure agrees, and they are here on request of Hoster Tully before striking. And this kind of, again, it really exemplified what I talked about with Aegon the Conqueror and the promise that these kingdoms have, right? If we are going to bend the knee to us, you're going to protect us, you're going to do these other things so that this all makes sense. And right now, that is what's being called in question. But another thing is brought up here. This is a very political savvy move from Hoster. We know that Hoster is still very sick and he is dying, but even at this point, he understands why you go to the king. Like I talked about, you want to gain an upper hand here, and if you can get the crown on your side, as well as spinning all of the image or the perception of this war being on the Lannisters being the aggressors, the bad guys in this situation, this is a huge move. And even Ned is going to understand that Hoster Tully is extremely smart here, and thank the gods for him. And again, I want to circle back to this because we all look at this because we like Ned's side of this, right? We like the Tully, Stark side of this, but in reality, if you want to look at this objectively, the Tullys are the aggressors. They took Tyrion captive. I really want to make sure you guys understand that this is more of a war of propaganda than anything. Pycelle, again, being the Lannister man that he is, tells them if they have a complaint with Gregor to take that up with Tywin. This is no problem for the king, which is not true at all. It's not true at all. Like, yes, you could go to Tywin, but if you don't want to go to Tywin, you can always just go to the person that's in charge, right? You can't argue that. The king, Robert, is the person with the highest amount of power given the system. Now, that's not always true, right? You can have other people with more power than the king, but you would think it's the king with the most power. So that'll get us into page 469. So moving into page 469, Ned says it is all the king's justice. Again, just talking about what I said earlier, and we must all bow to his judgment. Pycelle tries one last time, saying, then yes, let us defer to Robert when he gets back. But Ned is not going to fall for that. He's not going to let Robert have this decision on this, because if it's up to Robert, Robert's probably going to do nothing. Ned is the person at this point that is in charge. Robert had appointed him to rule in his stead while he was off hunting, and Robert may be gone for days. And again, all the responsibilities fall to Ned. Ned then calls for Robar Royce. Ned asks if Royce's father is with the hunt and bids him to bring all that was said here to the king. Mark Piper then asks if they have permission to seek their vengeance. And there is the key problem. Because again, this is a war of propaganda. If you're going to try and get the Mountain detained or killed and stripping of all of his titles and things like that, like what Ned is going to do, you want to make it seem honorable justice. You want it to be justice. You want it to be fair. You don't want it to be the Riverlords coming off as revengeful and coming off as, you know, vengeful and again, aggressing upon the Lannisters' aggression. That doesn't look right, right? You want the propaganda and to view the Tully side right, so you go about it in a different way. Ned notes this, saying, "No, getting vengeance on the people of the Westerlands will not do for their wounded pride, but he hopes he can give the people impacted some small justice in the name of Robert." Again, another point here again is that attacking all the small folk, the people that are innocent in this, is just not really the way, right? You don't really need to fight fire with fire in this situation, given that Robert is still the king and Ned has so much influence. At this, every eye was on him as he struggled to stand. Again, he doesn't want to show weakness. It's the same thing we talked about when Robert and Cersei come to visit him, how he kind of tries to rise himself up. He doesn't want to appear weak when giving this statement. But he notes how the North, they hold the old ways, and he hates to send another man to do his killing, but he is not able to given his leg. But at this, Loras pipes up. And this is, again, something we really didn't see in the show. We didn't really see a lot of this development with House Tyrell, but Ned notes how young he looks, even younger than his 16 years of age, in his shiny armor, but he asks to be given the honor of acting out Ned's justice. Littlefinger notes how stupid this is, as the Mountain will not just bend his neck for him. And again, we see another interesting point of people wanting vengeance, because remember, if we go back to the tournament, Loras and the Mountain, Loras had beaten the Mountain in the tourney using kind of some dirty tricks, and the Mountain had tried to kill Loras. So this is kind of him getting his own revenge. But this is where we come to an interesting point here, because Ned could possibly get some favor here with the Tyrells, given he makes, you know, friendship with Loras. Now, this is kind of what a lot of people imply, like Varys and Littlefinger in this chapter. I don't really see it that way. I don't really see how this gains the Tyrells to Ned's cause, because it really doesn't. And given what we know is actually going to end up happening based upon, you know, Beric being ambushed and eventually killed, if Loras was killed here, I think actually the Starks would not gain any favors with the Tyrells at all. Now, that's a whole different rabbit hole we could go down in, but I would love to hear your guys' opinions. Do you think that Tywin would let the Mountain even kill Loras, given the situation of how important the Tyrells are? Could, again, if Loras is like taken prisoner, for instance, instead by the Lannisters, that could be huge, right? Or would this have been completely different? Would the Tyrells actually have supported Loras a lot more, giving him a lot more men instead of just like I think it's like 100-ish men that end up going in this party? Would the Tyrells have basically joined the fray given this? So there's a lot of different ways that this could have gone with Loras going to get Ned's justice, more or less. I'm just not sure how this would have gone down, but I don't see, for me with Ned, I don't really see it as a bad move of not letting Loras go. But maybe you guys see this a bit differently than me. I definitely think you can. There's just so many ways of predicting the future with that. But that gets us into page 470. Ned ignores this, doesn't even really like look at Loras, doesn't even say anything back, but just ignores him and calls to Beric. Thoros, Lothar, and Sir Gladden, and commands them to each get 20 men to their command, and they will be bolstered by 20 men of his own guard. Now, this is the mistake he makes, in my opinion, personally. Also, I was correct, it was 100 men. But this is the mistake he makes. Ned already, his guard is like running like very thin. We hear this again when it comes to when Alan is given the report to Ned after his injury. We know that, again, his men are struggling just to have their posts being manned, and now you take 20 more of his own men off. This is a terrible decision from Ned, given the climate of King's Landing right now, and given the hostilities between the Lannisters and the Starks at the capital right now. This is an awful decision. So this is the one thing I will say Ned slips up on. But these men are to go and do the justice on the Mountain. Also, Beric is given command of this little band of men that will eventually become the Brotherhood Without Banners. This is noble, but again, a mistake. I did note this in, my notes. It was just stupid for Ned to do this. He weakens himself. We look at, again, Clash of Kings specifically, where Tyrion is all about gaining more power through, again, whether that's through the City Watch, whether that's through having the Mountain Clan support him. He has a lot of men around him, a lot of power surrounding him. Ned is doing the opposite at this point. Ned then using, again, his commander voice that we note that Ned kind of talked about when looking at Robert at the Trident or during Robert's Rebellion specifically, or how he was always taught to have one. He denounces Gregor of his titles and incomes and sentences him to death. With this, Loras asks, what of him? Ned looks at him and even imagines Robb as he is so young and says that no one doubts his valor, but what he seeks is vengeance, not justice. He tells Beric to ride at first light, and at this, Ned says there will be no more petitions. And yeah, I think Ned denying Loras makes a lot of sense. Loras is too young, and this is going to be a very dangerous mission. And to me, I agree with Ned here, right? Because Ned, in a lot of ways, is trying to paint this picture of this is for justice, not for vengeance. And again, it's the problem with trying to say this is a bad decision from Ned is that how is Ned supposed to predict that Robert is going to die very quickly after this moment? Right? Because in a lot of ways, Ned doesn't need the Tyrells right now. And also, this isn't guaranteed that he's even going to get the support of the Tyrells like I've talked about. So in my opinion, it almost feels like a no-win situation in my opinion. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, because I think this is a very controversial decision that I really could see you going either way on. Ned then needs help to descend the throne, but notes Loras' stare and leaves the hall. As Ned moves from the throne, he notes Pycelle and Littlefinger have already left the hall, which is very interesting, given that we know both of these characters are not loyal to Ned at all, and will actually go to the Lannister side. Pycelle's already there, and Littlefinger already wants to go that way because he doesn't like Ned. It's kind of that foreshadowing that they are not really friends of Ned's, and if anything, are more Lannister men than Ned's. Varys again notes how Ned is a bold man. And again, this kind of foreshadows again that Varys is going to be the one that goes down to the dungeons and kind of sets up this whole ploy for the queen. And, that Ned is supposed to live and all this. It kind of is a nice foreshadow of that, is that Varys is kind of the closest one to Ned's actual interests, even though he really isn't either. And Ned asks why he is a bold man. And that'll get us into page 471, the last page of the chapter. Varys notes that if you're making enemies with the Lannisters, you want the Tyrells as allies, which I agree to disagree here, because the point here is that Ned doesn't really think he needs it, right? If there is a war, and the way Ned has handled this situation, he's made the Lannisters look really bad, he should have the backing of Robert, right? Robert trusts Ned more than he does Cersei, and we know Cersei does have influence on Robert as well, but given the situation and the Lannisters being the aggressor, given public opinion, he doesn't need the Tyrells. And also, I do not agree with the sentiment here that this would make the Tyrells friends to Ned just because of allowing Loras to do this mission. That just doesn't work for me anyway. Ned notes that Loras is young and will outgrow his disappointment, and may even thank Ned again, because Ned could have actually saved Loras' life. Varys then continues saying, not sending Sir Ilyn as he is the king's justice also was an interesting move, which again, not really, right? I get it that, Ilyn is the king's justice, it's who the person is that's supposed to carry these things out, but Ilyn Payne has obvious ties to Tywin, right? The reason he got his tongue removed is because he was boasting about how much better Tywin was than Aerys, and that Tywin was the actual king. So again, do you really want to send someone with obvious ties to the Lannisters and who is a Westerman himself? No, it's an obvious decision. Why would you do that? It's kind of interesting that even Varys even questions that. But again, Ned notes that himself. But this is foreshadowing again as to why Ilyn is so gung-ho to take Ned's head later on, because we know that wasn't the plan, right? When they go to kill Ned, it was just Joffrey saying it, and he was probably prompted by Littlefinger But also, it makes a lot of sense as to why Ilyn would want to do it so quickly, because Ned disrespected his position. And we know that Varys had seen Ilyn looking very, not exactly happy that Ned hadn't given him the job. But that will be the end of the chapter. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys all in next week's video. I hope you guys all enjoy the Halloween videos. They're just themed basically because they're either the creepy topics or they are just the villains. So yeah, thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.